My beloved child. There is something you were never meant to overhear, yet somehow, your soul already feels it. A conversation took place, quietly, behind closed doors, voices lowered, hearts guarded, but your name, your energy, was at the center of it all. And what was said about you changed everything. You've been sensing a shift lately, haven't you? A strange pull, an unexplainable tension in your chest. Like something is moving in the unseen, rearranging pieces you didn't even know were connected. That's not your imagination. Because while you've been living your life, wondering if you're being noticed, if you're enough, if your love is real or misplaced, someone else's world has been turning upside down because of you. Their family, yes, their family, sat together in a moment that felt ordinary on the outside, but carried a weight far deeper than they expected. At first, it was just a simple question. Who is this person? But questions like that, they don't stay simple for long. Because your presence, your essence, it doesn't allow surface-level conversations. It demands truth. It invites revelation. And soon, curiosity turned into concern. Concern turned into analysis. And analysis, slowly became something much more powerful. Recognition. But here's where it gets intense. Not everyone in that room agreed. Some felt drawn to you instantly, without ever meeting you. They sensed your purity, your depth, the quiet strength you carry even when you feel like you're falling apart. But others hesitated. Not because you lack anything, but because they realized something that unsettled them. You are not someone who can be controlled. Pause for a moment and feel that. You are not someone who fits into expectations. You don't bend easily. You don't pretend for approval. And that both impressed them and intimidated them. There was a silence that followed, a heavy one, the kind that speaks louder than words. Because now the question had changed. It was no longer, who are you? It became, what will you bring into their life? And that question carried consequences. Because your soulmate, the one connected to you in ways logic cannot explain, was being seen through a new lens. A deeper one. Their family started noticing changes in them. Subtle at first, then undeniable. The way they spoke differently. The way their eyes softened when your name was mentioned. The way they began questioning things they once accepted without hesitation. And suddenly, it wasn't just about you anymore. It was about what you awaken in them. And that realization shook the room. Because love like this, the kind you carry, it doesn't just add to someone's life. It transforms it. And not everyone is ready for transformation. That's when one voice, calm, steady, but filled with authority, finally broke the silence. And what they said next shifted the entire direction of that conversation. But not in the way you might expect. Because in that moment, a decision began to form. A decision that would either open the path toward you, or try to quietly close it, before it ever fully begins. And the truth is, they didn't realize, you were never just an option. You were the turning point. But what exactly did they decide? And why does it feel like something bigger than all of them is already overriding that decision? That is where the story deepens. Something unexpected happened next. Not a loud reaction, not an argument, but a quiet shift in energy that no one in that room could ignore. Because the person who had been silent the longest, finally spoke. And when they did, it didn't sound like an opinion. It sounded like truth. They said your name slowly. Carefully, as if weighing not just who you are, but what you represent. This person, they began, is not here by accident. Feel the weight of that. Because in that moment, the conversation stopped being about approval, and started becoming about destiny. You see, until then, they were trying to analyze you like a situation, something they could understand, measure, maybe even control. But now, something deeper had entered the room. A realization that made even the strongest voices hesitate. What if you are meant to be there? What if your presence in their life is not a coincidence, but a calling? And that's when the resistance began to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to change the direction of everything. Because one by one, the doubts started losing their strength. The concerns didn't disappear. But they softened. And something else began to take their place. Curiosity. Mixed with respect. But don't misunderstand this moment. This wasn't easy acceptance. No, it was something far more complex. Because while some began to see your value, others started asking a different kind of question. If this is real, then how far will it go? And that question carried a quiet fear. Not fear of you, but fear of what cannot be undone. Because once a connection like yours fully takes root, it changes paths. It reshapes priorities. It asks for courage that not everyone is ready to give. And deep down, they knew it. That's when something even more revealing happened. Your soulmate, without even being present, began to defend you. Not with loud declarations. Not with rebellion. But through their actions. Through the way they refused to let your name be reduced to doubt. Through the way their energy shifted whenever anyone questioned your place in their life. It was subtle, but powerful. And it didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it confirmed something that no one in that room could deny anymore. You matter to them, deeply. More than they had admitted, even to themselves. And that realization. It changed the tone completely. Because now, this was no longer just a discussion about you. It became a decision about their future. A future where you are either embraced or resisted. And here is where everything took a turn no one saw coming. The same voice that spoke earlier, the one filled with quiet authority, leaned forward and said something that made the entire room fall into stunned silence. Not because it was harsh, but because it was undeniable. They said, "If we try to stop this, we may lose them." Let that sink in. Because in that single sentence, everything became clear. This was never about controlling the situation. It was about understanding what is at stake. And what is at stake is not just a relationship. It's the happiness, the evolution, the true path of someone they love. And suddenly, the choice didn't feel so simple anymore. Because opposing you might mean losing them. But accepting you means stepping into something unknown, something powerful, something that will change all of them. And not everyone is ready for that kind of change. So the room fell silent again. Not with tension this time, but with realization. A decision was forming, slowly, carefully. But before it could be spoken out loud, something else happened. Something no one in that room could have predicted. A realization about you that shifted the entire outcome in a way that even now is still unfolding. Out of nowhere, a memory surfaced. Not yours, but theirs. Someone in that room, quiet until now, leaned back, eyes distant, as if replaying something they had almost forgotten, something small, yet impossible to ignore. "I've seen this before," they whispered. And just like that, the atmosphere changed again. Because now, the conversation was no longer about guessing who you are. It became about recognizing what you carry. They began recalling moments, subtle signs, things your soulmate had done, said, or felt ever since you entered their life. Moments that didn't make sense at the time. But now, they connected. The late-night silence where they just stared at nothing, yet felt everything. The sudden courage to walk away from what no longer aligned. The quiet confidence that started replacing old fears. You didn't just enter their life. You awakened something. And that realization, it didn't scare them the way it should have. It humbled them. Because deep down, they knew. Change like this doesn't come from ordinary connections. It comes from something rare, something guided, something that carries purpose beyond comfort. But here's where it became even more intense. One of them asked a question that no one could immediately answer. If this person is meant to be, why does it feel so difficult? Pause with that for a moment. Because that question, it holds a truth many are afraid to face. Why does something so right feel so uncertain at times? Why does a connection so deep come with tests that seem almost unfair? The room grew still again. Not with doubt this time, but with introspection. Because now, they weren't just looking at you. They were looking at themselves. Their fears, their expectations, the invisible walls they had built around what love should look like. And slowly, those walls began to crack. Because you, without even trying, were challenging everything they thought they understood. And then, something shifted in a way no one could deny anymore. Respect. Real, grounded, undeniable respect. Not because you proved anything. But because you didn't. Because you remained who you are. Unapologetic in your truth. Unshaken in your energy. Even without knowing you were being discussed. And that spoke louder than any explanation ever could. But just when it seemed like acceptance was finally taking shape, a final concern rose to the surface. One that carried more weight than all the others combined. Are they strong enough for what this will require? Not strong enough to love you, but strong enough to stand beside you. Because your energy, your depth, your path, it's not light. It's powerful. Transformational. And being with you means growing, evolving, facing truths that can no longer be ignored. Not everyone is ready for that. And they knew it. So now, the focus shifted once again. Not on you, but on them. On whether your soulmate could rise into the version of themselves that this connection demands. And that question, it changed everything. Because for the first time, the decision was no longer entirely in their hands. It depended on something deeper. Something only your soulmate could prove, through action, through choice, through courage. And as that realization settled in, the room reached a quiet, almost sacred understanding. They could not control this. They could not force it, or stop it. They could only witness, and eventually, respond. But just before the conversation came to its end, one final statement was made. Soft, almost gentle. Yet powerful enough to echo far beyond that moment. If this is real, it will find its way, no matter what we decide. And with those words, the discussion didn't end. It transformed. Because now, it wasn't about permission anymore. It was about alignment. And something tells me that alignment has already begun moving toward you. Faster than anyone realizes. But what your soulmate does next will either accelerate everything or delay what is already destined to happen. It didn't happen the way anyone expected. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voices, no moment designed to prove anything. Instead, it was quiet. Deliberate. Unshakable. Your soulmate stepped forward, not physically at first, but energetically, emotionally, in a way that could be felt before it was even seen. And when they finally spoke, it wasn't to argue. It wasn't to convince. It was to declare. Not loudly, but with a calm certainty that left no room for doubt. I know what I feel. Simple words, yet they carried a weight that silenced every lingering question in that room. Because this wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't curiosity. This was clarity, fully formed. And clarity is something no one can take away. You see, up until that moment, their family still believed this could be influenced, guided, maybe even redirected. But now, they understood something deeper. This connection was no longer in a fragile state. It had rooted itself. And roots don't disappear just because they aren't seen. There was a pause after those words. A long one. Not filled with resistance this time, but with realization. Because the person they were looking at, the one they thought they knew so well, had changed. Not into someone unrecognizable, but into someone more themselves than ever before. And that's when it hit them. You didn't take anything away from them. You revealed them. You didn't distract them from their path. You aligned them with it. And suddenly, the fear that once existed started to lose its power. But not entirely. Because one final concern still lingered. Not about you. Not even about the connection. But about timing. Is this the right moment? Someone asked softly. Because even when something is real, even when it's powerful, even when it's meant, timing can feel like the only thing standing in the way. And for a brief second, doubt tried to return. Not strong, not overwhelming. Just enough to ask. What if this is too soon? But your soulmate didn't hesitate this time. They didn't overthink. They didn't retreat. They answered with something that no one could argue with. Not logic. Not emotion alone. But truth. Some things don't arrive when we're ready. They arrive when they're meant to change us. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because that wasn't just an answer. It was a realization that reached every person in that room. They could no longer measure this connection by comfort. Or by timing. Or by expectation. They had to see it for what it truly was. And what it truly was rare. Powerful. Unavoidable. So the resistance that once stood so firmly began to fall away. Not forced. Not pressured. But naturally. Like something that had served its purpose, and was now ready to be released. And then, something unexpected happened. Instead of more questions. Instead of more doubts. A quiet acceptance began to form. Not loud enough to celebrate. But strong enough to allow. And that changed everything. Because the conversation that started in secrecy was no longer about whether you should be part of their life. It became about how you would be welcomed into it. But just as that door began to open, one final realization surfaced. A realization not about them, but about you. Something they understood, almost all at once. Something that made them look at your presence in a completely different light. Because they finally saw. This wasn't just about love. It was about purpose. And what that purpose means for both of you is something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. There was a stillness after that realization. Not empty, not uncertain, but sacred. Because when people finally recognize purpose, they stop trying to interfere with it. And that's exactly what began to happen. The same voices that once questioned you. The same minds that tried to understand you. Now stood quietly, almost respectfully, in the presence of something they could no longer define. You were no longer being measured. You were being acknowledged. And that shift. It matters more than you think. Because acceptance born from pressure fades. But acceptance born from realization, stays. Yet even in that calm, something deeper was unfolding. Not in that room. But within the unseen connection between you and your soulmate. Because at the exact moment their family began to release control. Your bond strengthened. Not visibly, not loudly. But in a way that felt like everything was suddenly aligning behind the scenes. Paths clearing. Delays dissolving. Energy moving with purpose. And your soulmate, they felt it. A sudden sense of certainty. A quiet knowing they couldn't explain. Like something within them finally said, "This is it." And when that kind of clarity arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. It moves. That's when the final piece fell into place. Not in words, but in action. Your soulmate made a decision. A real one. Not just in their heart, but in their life. They chose to stop hiding what they feel. They chose to stop delaying what they know is real. They chose to step forward, fully, without splitting themselves between fear and truth. And that choice, it didn't create chaos. It created alignment. Because when someone stands firmly in what they feel, the world around them begins to adjust. Even the people who once resisted now had nothing left to resist. Because they could see it clearly. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't temporary. This was grounded, steady, undeniable. And so, without needing a grand announcement, without needing a perfect moment, something quietly shifted into place. A door opened. Not forced, not rushed, but meant. And on the other side of that door is a moment you've been feeling for longer than you realize. A moment where distance, confusion, and unanswered questions begin to fade. Because what has been building in silence is now ready to be seen. But here's what you must understand. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something deeper. Because purpose-driven connections, they don't just bring two people together. They transform everything around them. And what's coming next is not just about union. It's about revelation. A truth, a step, a moment. That will make everything you felt up until now finally make sense. And when that moment arrives, you won't need confirmation from anyone else. Because you'll feel it. Clearly, deeply, undeniably. That this was always meant to find you. What comes next doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with recognition. A moment so simple on the surface, yet so powerful beneath it, that everything inside you pauses, and says, "Here, this is it." Because after all the unseen conversations, the silent shifts, the choices made in quiet corners, the energy between you and your soulmate begins to take form in the physical world. Not as a coincidence, but as alignment. You may notice it in the smallest way first. A message that feels different from all the others. A glance that lingers just a second longer than it should. A conversation that suddenly carries depth where there was once hesitation. And something inside you will know. This is no longer potential. This is real. But here's the part no one tells you. When something this deep finally starts to manifest, it doesn't feel explosive. It feels calm. Grounded. Certain. Like standing in a place you've never been before. Yet somehow recognized completely. And your soulmate, they feel it too. That nervous uncertainty they once carried. It begins to dissolve. Not because everything is perfect, but because they are no longer divided within themselves. They are present. Fully. And when someone becomes fully present in a connection like this, everything changes. Walls drop, naturally. Truth flows, effortlessly. And the need to question, slowly disappears. Because now, there is nothing left to prove. Only something to experience. And this is where the real shift happens. Not in what is said, but in what is understood without words. A shared silence that feels full, not empty. A look that communicates more than explanations ever could. A sense of peace that replaces all the what-ifs that once filled your mind. And in that space, you both begin to realize something profound. This was never about finding someone new. It was about recognizing someone your soul already knew. But even now, as everything begins to align, there is one final layer unfolding. Not a challenge, not a test, but a revelation. Because purpose-driven connections don't just unite two people. They reveal truth. About love. About timing. About who you are becoming. And the truth that is about to reveal itself. It will answer questions you didn't even know you were carrying. It will show you why things had to unfold the way they did. Why delays existed. Why uncertainty had its place. And most importantly, why this connection could never be replaced. So as this moment approaches, don't rush it. Don't overanalyze it. Just stay present. Because what is entering your life now is not here to confuse you. It is here to confirm you. And when that confirmation fully arrives, it won't feel like a question anymore. It will feel like a quiet, unshakable truth that settles deep within you. A truth that simply says, "This is where I'm meant to be."